We're coming, and we ain't backing down.
We don't need a bunch of cats in here looking in the mirror.
Everybody just do your job. You understand that?
Hey, will you shut up?
I'm bitterly disappointed with the officiating today.
Guys being dudes.
And they run through our like through a tin horn, man.
Thank you, Lee. And thank you, Ross Fulton, for being back. I am glad that Ohio State made the national championship game so that we can effectively bookend the season. We had Ross on before media days back in July as our Ohio State guy, and we both put the gauntlet down, national championship or bust for the Ohio State Buckeyes. And look where we are, a few days ahead of both being down in Atlanta for the national title game. Ross, welcome back to the show.
Hey, happy to be here, Richard. Thank you.
Indeed. So I guess let's start from there. We both had some thoughts about this Ohio State team coming into the season schematically. Primarily the marriage of Chip Kelly and Ryan Day and how those two offensive minds were going to mesh. Chip's run game, Ryan's passing game. And so over the course of the season, as they've had their ups and their downs, how have you seen that actually play out?
Yeah, I was going to literally use the same term, ups and downs. a little bit of a roller coaster. I'm trying to think back, in July. My guess is, remembering as well as I can, I probably expected there to be more involvement in the quarterback and the run game, more of what you'd seen from Chip Kelly in the past. I think that there's definitely more run game diversity. There's some, formational things you can see from Chip, but it's very much a continuation of what Ryan Day has been doing, less of like a hard break, right? And it probably reaches nadir against Michigan, where I felt like Chip, the run game obviously wasn't working still, and offensive line injuries, all that. But the passing game was like missing what Ryan Day brings to it, especially with all the split safety stuff that Michigan has thrown at Ohio State, like doubling Jeremiah Smith. And then they're like, in response, like Chip's running like mirrored, out routes. And it's like, this isn't going to do it, dude. And it was like, sort of like, oh my God, maybe this isn't working. But obviously like the playoff flipped that around where you're getting like the benefit of like Chip realized like, we got to change this run game up, like a lot more counter, a lot more gap the last few weeks. And then you saw, getting back to a lot of Ryan Day, pushing the football vertically, attacking zone coverage in particular down the field.
Yeah, I was going to let's go back kind of earlier in the season. Obviously, they thrashed Michigan State. They, a little dicey with Iowa in the first half, and then they dispatched with them. And then the Oregon was obviously the game where they really go shot for shot with the Ducks in that game. The first Oregon game, demonstrably different than the second Oregon game, the Rose Bowl. And for me, like Oregon and Tennessee both come out in a game with a defensive game plan that is just effectively defensive suicide, which is like, we're going to single coverage the best receiver. Well, we're going to single cover Ohio State, which means you're single covering the best receiver in football. And that just, I don't know why Oregon thought that was going to work. Tennessee tried it and it didn't work either. So in the 3 weeks between the Michigan game and the first two rounds of the playoff, the Rose Bowl and the first round home game, what do you think they shifted? What do you think they changed when they burned the game plan from the Michigan game?
So a couple things. And I would actually say that I think the Tennessee and Oregon both tried, like the first series or two, tried to steal a page from Michigan. And they tried to play cover 2 a bunch. They tried to play some cover 4. It wasn't who they were, and they didn't do it well. And Ryan Day, and this is where I saw the difference. Against Michigan, they just were not attacking the seam, with Emeka Egbuka particularly. If you want to double, Jeremiah Smith, you got other good players, and right away they went after it, running 3 verticals, hitting seam routes against Tampa. And then quickly, Tennessee and Oregon were both well, this isn't working for us. So we're going back to playing more single high. But I just think it was some of that, it was, so in the passing game, at least, as I said, it was regaining the explosiveness, even post Oregon, even in pre-Michigan, they just were not clicking offensively quite the same way. Obviously there were 2 bad offensive line injuries in there. You lose your 2 best offensive linemen, but in the passing game, they just weren't pushing it vertically as much. They weren't featuring Jeremiah Smith as much. And then the other big thing, as I said, the run game. Like, Ryan Day and Chip Kelly have both been zone heavy guys their entire career. And it's like against Michigan, it's like, I mean, these guys see film too. Like, Ohio State people are like, oh, how can they do this? But it's like they ran counter a couple times against Michigan, and that was like the one thing they blocked decently. And so they're like, let's do this instead. Like, it didn't take rocket scientists, but against Tennessee and Oregon in particular, maybe a little less against Texas, but it was just like super gap heavy counter, pulling the tackle, pulling the tight end, mixing in those concepts. So it was a pretty stark change in the run game in terms of the scheme.
And everybody will lament the fact that they ran the ball against Michigan a bunch of times to a lack of effectiveness. But like, look, on its face, it's sound. If you're gonna get split safety looks from Michigan that entire game, 2 safeties deep, light in the box. You mentioned sort of Tampa 2 scheme, which is sort of a variation of cover 2. It's a situation where like the old Tampa Bay Bucks and Chicago Bears under Lovie Smith, like they use that to win Super Bowls for years and years and years. And so because of that, we're talking about split safety looks. And on its face, if you're going to get split safety looks, you run the ball into it. It doesn't matter if you have Jeremiah Smith, Marvin Harrison, or Randy Moss. Run the ball into it because they're soft looks. Well, Ohio State was getting smacked because Michigan was able to have, when you have Kenneth Grant and Mason Graham up front, they can win those matchups. The perfect defense to play, and you're seeing it in the NFL, is split safeties deep with a front 4 that can win. That's why Michigan beat them, because they were able to do that. And Tennessee wasn't able to, because you mentioned Tennessee and Oregon. That's not who they are. Well, now as we look to Notre Dame, that sure as hell ain't who Notre Dame is. And so that's why I think this is a particularly bad matchup for Notre Dame to get this Ohio State team.
Yeah, I think this is the fascinating part of this game coming up. When people like to, there's sort of like this like very high level comparison of Michigan and Notre Dame. Like they're sort of both these run first teams that want to play ugly games and, out execute you. But like defensively, they're very different. And like part of like the Ryan Day, beyond like the psychological stuff with Michigan, like part of it is just like Michigan runs this NFL Fangio style Ravens split safety, very complex zone match schemes that like, Ohio State's been a better passing team than anything else that like has caused some issues. And that is, as you said, not Notre Dame. Like maybe the numbers are skewed a little bit by the fact they played a couple option teams and whatnot this year. But like, I think Cody Alexander has Notre Dame playing cover 1 or man coverage with a single eye safety like 50% of the time, which is like a crazy high.
I have it even higher than that.
I
have it even higher than that. I have at least man coverage on. I think I'm looking at what I have like almost 70% of the time.
Wow. Yeah. And so like it is interesting because they played Ohio State the last 2 years, right? And obviously like a regular season September game, a little bit different. And I do think though, I bet if you went back and like tallied up that 2023 game last year in South Bend, they probably played man less than they do most of the time. They definitely mixed in, some Tampa. They mixed in like some quarter half a little bit. But as you said, it's like it's not what they are. So it's kind of to me like Tennessee trying to do that, right? And it's like one thing to do it on third down, but like on first down, are you comfortable fitting the run from split safeties when you've played with a single high and put 8 guys in the box all year? So like, and for all Ohio State's offensive line issues, like they still run the ball well enough to like force you to respect it, particularly Quinshon Judkins and Travion Henderson. So yeah, to me, that's the fascinating thing. I'm guessing they like run some cover 1, but they roll, a safety to Jeremiah Smith and basically are playing cover 0 to the other side of the field, or maybe the underneath, the underneath Rad is, or Robert, linebacker is helping on Ibuka but that's kind of the matchup to me though. And then or at least scheme wise for sure that I'm looking for.
Yeah. I mean, if they play cover 1, Jeremiah Smith's going to have 200 yards catch. Like he's going to have 200 yards receiving. That's just the bottom line of it. But what I think Texas did was interesting was a lot of rocking and rolling and changing who was the underneath defender under Jeremiah, right? So Texas would have split safeties, 2 safeties deep. Then at the snap, they'd roll the safeties. So it'd usually be Makuba is the guy who is sort of nominally over top Jeremiah. But then they drop a defensive end, they would take a nickel, they would take different players to play underneath of Jeremiah. So you have the bracket, but it's with different guys. You're changing the picture post snap, and you're trying to fool Will Howard, who frankly got away with it a couple times in that first half. So it can be done, but you have to do it. And you brought up the 23 game last September when they played in September in the regular season. And for me, that was Notre Dame played so far off in that game. Like Notre Dame's got safeties at like 15, 16 yards off the line of scrimmage, gave so much airspace to Ohio State. And, Ohio State only scored like 20 points in that game. Like it's not like they moved the ball at will. So, there's something there, but I think it's a little bit different, especially without Benjamin Morrison and especially without Riley Mills up front for Notre Dame.